In one of my last videos, I talked about the compatibility between Gridfinity and Multiboard and OpenGrid. And my conclusion was basically this. Yes, both systems are compatible with Gridfinity, but there are some caveats. In this video, I will go one step further and show a solution to one of those caveats. How to build a continuous Gridfinity shelf on Multiboard without annoying gaps between shelf sections, and without relying on a tiny little cleat to hold all the weight. In other words, a Gridfinity shelf that can be as long as your wall, your printing patience, and your imagination allows. The problem starts with the most common Gridfinity shelf designs. They work, are very useful. I have printed them, I use them all the time, but because Gridfinity and Multiboard are based on different grid spacings, the pieces don't naturally align up forever. Gridfinity is based on 42 mm and Multiboard is based on 25 mm. And because those two numbers don't really match up, you can print small shelf sections that work individually, but once you start putting several of them side by side, you get small gaps and support walls in between. So instead of having one clean, continuous Gridfinity shelf, you end up with separate pieces that almost line up, but not quite. Now, Multiboard does have an official style Gridfinity shelf solution that uses a rail. In theory, that should solve this problem because the shelf can slide along the rail and you are no longer locked into the same spacing issue. But I personally don't really trust that solution for heavier bins because all the weight hangs on this very small cleat. So if you're holding hardware, screws, batteries or anything that has a little bit more weight, it looks a little bit sketchy to me. The shelf needs some kind of additional support. But then we run into another problem. If the support is on the top side of the shelves, it gets in the way of the Gridfinity bins. The bins need that space, so if you put structural material there, you break the continuous shelf idea. That means the support has to come from below. So the basic design challenge was this. How do you create a continuous Gridfinity shelf supported from underneath that still mounts cleanly to Multiboard grid and is easy to print and does not need supports while printing? And that is where we need to do some math. As I said before, Gridfinity uses 42 mm spacing and Multiboard 25. If you calculate the least common multiply of those two numbers, you get 1050 mm. That means that if you start a row of Gridfinity and Multiboard squares, they line up at the start and then they line up again after 105 centimeters. And I'm guessing most of you don't have a printer that can print 1 meter long Gridfinity shelves in one piece. I definitely don't. So how do we split this long piece up into printable pieces? And since I recently bought a space mouse and I needed an excuse to spend a few hours getting used to it, I decided to model this Gridfinity shelf for Multiboard as an exercise. Since most 3D printers have a 220 by 220 mm bed or greater, I decided to use a 210 mm shelf section. This is exactly 5 Gridfinity units. So from the Gridfinity side, this works perfectly. But from the Multiboard side, 210 mm does not divide cleanly by 25. That means the mounting points need to shift from one shelf to the next. And that's the core of the solution. Instead of creating one universal shelf piece and trying to force it to fit everywhere, I created 5 different shelves. Each one has the same Gridfinity geometry on top, but the mounting points on the back are offset differently to match the Multiboard grid. So you mount them in order. You have 5 pieces and you need to mount them 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, left to right. And after the 5th piece, you can start again with a piece marked number 1. That gives you a continuous shelf on top, while still keeping the mounting points aligned with Multiboard grid behind it. So instead of one giant 150 mm printed shelf, you get 5 printable 210 sections that complete a full alignment cycle. And because the support comes from below, Gridfinity surface itself remains continuous. You can put one bin next to the other without any interference. And since I was already working on the design, I decided to make a few variations. I made versions for 1 unit in depth up to 4 units. I also made 2 different support angle versions. One for lighter loads and one for stronger support that mounts on 2 multi-connect points. Is this perfect? No. There are definitely some downsides. The main one is that because the supports come from below, the shelf uses more vertical space. So if you are trying to pack shelves extremely close together in the vertical, then this might not be the most space efficient option. But for me, this is a trade-off, and you have to decide if it is worth your while. I already have a few ideas for how to use some of this wasted space underneath the shelf, so this may become less of a downside in the future. I've published this version on printables. Let's call this a beta version. So if you want to print it, please be aware that this is still under development and any comment or feedback would be well received. Especially if you test it with the deeper bins, different print settings or bigger units and longer runs, I would be very interested in hearing from your results. For now, this version focuses on multiboard, but I will look into doing the same thing for OpenGrid and also honeycomb storage wall. So if you're interested in those 2 systems, subscribe to the channel and keep an eye out for the next updates.